Welcome to the EntrePastors podcast on YouTube. This is a show that helps pastors think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the EntrePastors podcast on YouTube. Hey, my name's John Sanders. I'm one of the co-hosts of the show, and we're so grateful to have you watching this episode. This is episode number 19, and today you're going to hear from a guest by the name of Greg Gray, who he's not a pastor, okay? You need to know that. He's not a pastor, but he certainly has been involved in many church dealings, as well as very successful in the corporate business space, helping work a lot of deals. And today we're going to have a conversation with him about how should pastors go about approaching their boards. If a pastor desires to take an entrepreneurial path but might be in a situation where they see their church board as standing in the way or being somewhat of an obstacle or presenting a challenge, how does a pastor go about having those conversations, those negotiations potentially, where it can be a win-win situation? And so we brought Greg on the show to just pick his brain a little bit and ask what advice would he give to pastors in that context and in that setting. So you're in for a really good one today. I can't wait for you guys to hear from our friend Greg Gray. So let's check out this interview that I did recently with Greg. Here you go. Welcome to the EntrePastors podcast, my friend. It's so good to have you on the show.
I am so glad to be here.
You and I are connected through a mutual mastermind that we're in together, and I'm the new guy to the group as of this year, so I'm still kind of learning who everybody is. But the more I get to know people like you in this group, I'm like, man, we are surrounded by some pretty amazing people that do some amazing things in the world. And as I've heard some of your expertise, I'm like, there's an area, even though you're not a pastor, I'm like, there's an area where Greg could definitely speak into the lives of pastors. So I'm grateful to have you on the show and looking forward to our conversation. Why don't we just start with a general overview? If you want to give an introduction to yourself, to our audience, tell us a little bit about the work that you do in the world.
Okay, so about 11 years ago now, I stepped out of corporate world. I was in corporate for many, many years and ran a lot of businesses and had a lot of executive roles. And so when I stepped out, I went into consulting and coaching, and I've owned other businesses too along the way. And so what I'm really focused on right now is doing two things: helping business owners eliminate chaos from their life. And the other thing I work on, which is what I really started with, was helping them be better leaders and build teams that are self-managed. That's the core of what I do.
I love that. So what kind of corporate work were you in back in the day?
So for many, many years, I was in automotive manufacturing. And so I was in a very fast pace, very high-strung environment for many, many years. A lot of stress. Worked, many hours, and was very successful. And in about, when you get to that midlife age, that 38-year-old age, I looked up and went, I just can't do this for another 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't believe that that's what God's called me to do for the next 20, 30 years. So I started searching and looking for what that was. And I realized what I was doing that I enjoyed as much as anything in that whole profession. I was really enjoying building leadership teams, and I really enjoyed basically doing what I'm doing now full time. And so I went, okay, how can I go from doing all this other stuff, which I was in a zone of excellence, but I wasn't in my zone of genius. And I said, how can I go just be in my zone of genius and do nothing else? And that was the quest I went on. And here I am today doing, everything I do, it's not work to me. It's just absolute passion, and I love it. And I wouldn't do anything else.
Yeah. Well, one area right away that comes to my mind is a question that I think would relate to a lot of pastors who are starting a business, especially if it's in the realm of coaching or some kind of consulting. You basically had to start that from scratch, right? And so I'd love to hear a little bit. How did you do that? How did you jump into that and start offering your services as a coach when up to that point you had been more involved just at the corporate level?
Well, I would suggest if you're going to make that transition, you don't just make it by pulling one lever and stepping out. So there was a lot of background work that I did for a couple of years, letting people know where I was headed with, obviously my company didn't know that I was working for, but people out there that could use my services. So I did some part-time coaching and things on the side to learn the skill and start making some connections and some networking. And I'm a pretty good networker. And so while I was networking for the 2 or 3 years before I knew I was going to step out, I had built a pretty good Rolodex of names and numbers that I could call on. So as I started stepping out, I really worked that network pretty hard to get me some clients to start with. And then that first year and a half, I was doing a lot of cold calling, a lot of door knocking. I mean, I was, felt like I was an evangelist, right? I was
Yeah.
out doing what I had to do to get business, and I would do whatever I had to do to make that happen. And so there was a lot of prayerful consideration about it and a lot of discernment. And the other thing was, my family and I had built enough cash reserves to go do that and not put ourselves in a bad situation. So as it caught on, things took off, and I never looked back. So
yeah, that's a very important piece that I hear given to coaches a lot. Like, don't launch a coaching business if you need money. Like, you need a runway to get that going to where you're not feeling that neediness and that pressure to get clients, but you can just serve them powerfully, and then the money will come as you start to do that. So well, Greg, the conversation I really wanted to have with you, I get the sense as I hear you tell some of your stories that you are a guy that has helped kind of mitigate work deals, work through conflict with different teams and corporations and that sort of a thing. And so I just want to tell a story from my side and see what you would say to this. I think this is a pretty common issue for a lot of pastors who are, they kind of in a traditional role, feeling overworked and underpaid in their pastoral role. And one of the biggest hurdles that might come up for them when they think about becoming an entrepreneurial pastor and starting some kind of business on the side is, man, how do I work this out with my church? How do I get permission to do this? How do I, negotiate this? And I'm just curious, what kind of advice would you give to a pastor that's in that place? And, and have you had any experience walking alongside of even church boards in different discussions like that?
yeah, I think it's a lot of it goes back to the relationship that you have and the mix of the people that are leading that church. I mean, you have to come from it from that direction first. So the first thing I'd want to do is ask some questions about what's the relationship like today. What kind of what hurdles have you gone through with them already? And that kind of sets the stage for the direction we're coming from. The other thing that would be very interesting to know would be the personalities of the people we're dealing with. So, you have to know your own personality very well too. I'm really big about knowing yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and but the key is you need to know your audience you're talking to, and so figuring out who those people are, the way they think, is going to actually help you create your best approach. It's like any negotiation you go into, whether it's corporate or church, it's all about people and people.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to find a win-win approach for it. So if it's presented to an organization, particularly in a pastoral setting, and they can see that they're going to benefit from it, and it's not going to hamper anything you're going to do from a pastoral standpoint, then it should be something they can grasp and say, oh, that's a really good thing.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I like to say is, it's good for a pastor to be, and I'm going to say this right, and I want to clarify it, to be in the world more than they're not. Because if you get, in the four walls of the church building and that's the only place you're at, you can't be as good a pastor as you can be as you're out and about. And so one of the things that I would weave into that conversation is this will actually help me reach other people and see things that I wouldn't normally see, and actually be more of a normal person. I put that in quotes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we want to be served by a pastor that is one of us, but then is guiding us towards something that's better,
Yeah.
versus somebody that thinks they have it, all correct, which we know that's not true. None of us do. And then there's this gap. And so I think an entrepreneurial pastor, in essence, is actually more approachable. And so if you take all those kind of dialogues and you put that into negotiable presentation, if you will, say, hey, this is something I really feel in my heart I want to do. It'll actually take pressure off financially for my family. It'll actually help me do some other things and see some things in the world that I can even talk about from the pulpit or whatever. I mean, I think you put all that together. It's a unique approach, and it's a really good package.
Yeah.
I think it's sellable.
Yeah. And, clearly you and I could easily come up with a long list. You already mentioned a few, but a list of pros, kind of those win-win things for the church where they would even benefit by having their pastor out in the marketplace. But I want to hit you with this question because this is not uncommon sadly, for some pastors serving in maybe some more toxic type environments, or even just super traditional where there's these heavy expectations of pastor. That's why we pay you a full-time salary of $30,000 a year. You are our full-time employee. So let's suppose that a pastor approaches their leadership team with all of those things, with all of the win-win. This is good for me and the church, but the church is just resistant, whether it's at the level of just a leadership board or whether it's the entire congregation that even has the voting power to say, no, we're not standing for this. What advice would you give to that pastor that's sitting here going, I don't know that I want to keep working for $30,000 a year. And it's frustrating that I'm serving a church that thinks they own me 24/7. Like they're being a little unreasonable. What would you say to that pastor?
Well, I would have them consider if the culture of that congregation is where they should be anyway. I mean, that's the very first obvious question. I actually know of a pastor that's a friend of mine that he went through this about a year and a half ago, and he's not pastoring anymore now. He went out on his own, and he's doing his own thing now. Probably doubled his income easily. Now he still gives back, excuse me, to the church, and he still has a heart for ministry. But he's ministering from different perspectives now. He's ministering where he works and his clientele and those kind of things. I mean, use me for example. I'm not a pastor. I've never had a role where I was full time in a pulpit. Just never have. Never, probably never will. That's not my calling. But I minister every day.
Yep.
I have those what I call tailgate conversations in my work, because as I'm coaching a business leader through things come up. Things about the marriage, their faith, or backsliding, or whatever it might be. And while I don't pretend to be a minister, we're all ministers of God. I mean, we're all called to do those things. And so I don't think you have to be in full-time ministry. Now, I'm not saying everybody here start quitting. We need pulpit ministers, right? We need full-time ministers. I'm not saying everybody quit, but if you're in that precarious situation, there may be a period of time in your life where you don't need to do that, or at least at that place. So there's other ways around it. And unfortunately, those very traditional churches are their own worst enemy many times.
Yeah.
And so they lose great people because of that. And that's a shame. But, if you can't talk them into it, you can't negotiate them into it, then you have to consider what's best for you and your family.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm on record as saying, and it's kind of an abrasive statement, but I don't care. I'm on record as saying my prayer is that the day is coming that church I just described, the profile of that church that is that toxic, that they really see themselves as owning their pastor at such a small salary 24/7 that they won't be able to even find a pastor any longer that will come and lead them or pastor them, because we're helping pastors kind of wake up and wise up. Like, look, it doesn't have to be that unhealthy. Like you can thrive in ministry and in the marketplace, and your family doesn't have to suffer on beans and rice consistently in the name of God. Like there's another option here. So
Absolutely.
I do like the idea of the win-win, though, that's the better scenario when we can approach our church and show how, look, this is not only good for me and my family, but it's also going to bless the rest of the church family. The hope would be that your normal average church family would go, that's a good thing. And if that blesses our pastor, then that blesses us too. And we're happy about that.
Well, to your point, this congregation that my friend was at, and he left a year and a half ago, they had to go reevaluate. And to their credit, they went, oh, maybe this isn't the model anymore. And so they have now have a minister that is their pulpit minister that is part-time. He actually teaches school during the week and preaches on the weekend, and they're okay with that. They readjusted, but it took the other gentleman leaving before that happened.
Yeah.
And so they wisened up to that and went, wow, things have changed. And I think we as, believers have to realize sometimes we have to be the change makers.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's a question, and I know you're not an attorney and don't claim to play one on TV, but are there legal considerations that a pastor might need to think through from a standpoint of jumping into entrepreneurial, some kind of entrepreneurial business as well as being a pastor? Like, are there any things from a legal standpoint that they should consider?
I don't think there's anything beyond just normal considerations for being, a business owner. I mean, I don't understand that there would be any cross-pollination of concern there, unless they were, doing nothing but selling to the congregation from the pulpit. Now that'd be a whole different ballgame, but forget legal. That's ethical, right? That's
Right,
unethical.
right.
So you don't even have to go to the legal there. I don't really foresee anything that's a big concern. I think if you have a proper business entity and all your ducks are in a row in it, depending what type of business that might be, I don't see there's a major issue at all.
Yeah. So do you personally know of pastors that are doing stuff in both the marketplace and, normal church world? Like, do you personally know some EntrePastors in your world?
Absolutely, I do. I know one that does real estate. I know another one that has a farm, farming operation that he sells from. And I've known some that have done even consulting and that type of work, during the week, sort of you know, kind of a spiritual consultant, if you will. They would help, business owners or leaders, executives kind of get their spiritual life straightened out. And I know that sounds kind of odd to people, but that's what a minister should do anyway. Well, they were taken to another level. They wanted to buy their time and literally have them work on their life specifically, right?
Mhm.
And so I think any of those things make sense. I know some that are have franchises, restaurants, those kind of things on the side. I mean, I don't see what's wrong with any of those things. I mean, the way I look at it is, if I was a franchise owner, for example, let's say I own 2 or 3 Wendy's restaurants, and all of a sudden I want to become a minister. They hired me into a pulpit, but I wasn't going to sell my restaurants. What does it matter? So what does it matter if you go the other way and you're a minister, and then you go out and decide to go do something like that? I don't understand why there would be any conflict in that or any issue in that.
Yeah. Here's a question about those individuals you mentioned, and maybe you don't know, you might have to guess on this, but do you think that they know that there's other pastors out there like them, or do you think they feel like they are on an island by themselves as an EntrePastor?
Well, I know 2 of them know each other, and so they talk about their investments and things. And matter of fact, they're very bold about it. They think it's incumbent on them to be that way, sort of kind of like, Paul was a tent maker, right?
Yeah.
And Paul didn't take income from anybody. Matter of fact, he just carried it and gave it to other people. And so if you look at his example, I mean, we got a spiritual guide right there and scriptural reference that says, hey, this guy moved from place to place and preached all kinds of, yet he worked.
Yep.
So why can't another? So they kind of take that reference and say, hey, we think it's incumbent on us to do this because we take pressure off the church. We don't have to have as big an income, and so there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, if you think about it, how is a minister ever going to have retirement if they can't have enough income and do some things?
Yep.
So I really think this is, if you look back in the last 100, 150 years, it's really more of a nowadays problem.
Yep.
Because there used to not be W-2 corporation type entities. And everybody was a entrepreneur back in the day, right? Everybody raised their own goats and their own sheep and their own cows and their own garden and everything. And nobody complained about it. And now we think, wow, we got to separate them. They're a full-time minister. They can't do anything else. I just don't think that's right.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I'm grateful for your, weighing in on that. And that's the thing I find with the average pastor that I know that is successful in business. Many of them feel like they can't really talk about that much, certainly not within their church family, but they feel so alone. And so that's really one of the things we're doing with this EntrePastors platform is we're connecting these guys and we're celebrating. I'm like, this is normal. This is good. This is a healthy thing for you to show up in the world as an entrepreneur as well as a pastor. Like if God's called you to that, that's awesome. But you don't have to just do that. And when you mentioned a minute ago, these pastors that are, lacking retirement, that is such a common story we hear. I would say probably the average age of the pastor that's reaching out and finding this content. Certainly we've got younger guys, but man, we're getting a lot of those guys that are getting to the later end of their career as a pastor, and they're looking into the next few years going, I don't have anything to retire on. In some cases they followed the advice of, opting out of Social Security. Not that that's an amazing retirement plan anyway, but they don't even have that. And, years and years of, well, we'll just, take it by faith and trust God. I mean, that's great. But now here we are approaching retirement with nothing but faith. So, and I'm not trying to downplay that. I'm just saying, I agree. Like we need to set these pastors up with a better plan. And so, I'm excited about what we're seeing happen through this platform and just making this more of a normal thing for pastors, a pathway for them to follow. So, hey, I have one
I
other. Go
appreciate you
ahead.
doing it. I just want to tell you, I appreciate you doing this because you're bringing light to something that is kind of in the dark. And you know what, when things are in the dark, what happens? It's not very good. And so keep preaching from the mountaintops on this stuff, because we as, secular business coaches would love to see the melding of ministers coming out and doing something wonderful, and maybe we can help in some way, right? Because it's to me, it's almost a duty for us that see that it's wrong to speak up.
Yeah.
And to not shame the people that are trying to force ministers into nothing but full-time ministry, but to educate them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
And
so good. One of the things I've been saying for a while now is that the model we call church is broken and it's time we fix it. And the biggest evidence I point to is the fact that we have, the statistics tell us anywhere from 1,500 to 1,700 pastors a month that are quitting ministry. And I'm telling you that most of the time it is not a pretty picture when these guys walk away. They walk away feeling like failures, utterly burned out, in some cases walking away from the faith altogether, in some cases taking their life in suicide. Like it is not what we have built. The model that we have built and called normal church ministry is killing our pastors. And so that's where I've just come to the place we're going to shout this from the rooftops. There's a better way of doing this, and it doesn't have to be so unhealthy. So, hey, before we move into kind of our backstage area of the podcast, I did just want to ask you two more quick questions. One is, if there was a pastor that was interested in reaching out to you for any of the advice or consulting or coaching that you offer, what would be the best way for them to find you?
they can go to gregorygray.com. So it's just my name, gregorygray.com. And I'd be glad to talk to anybody about what they're going through. Yeah.
Fantastic. And then before we sign off of this part of the interview, I would just maybe throw you one more softball to say, if you had a moment to speak to a pastor today that's contemplating this, they're getting excited at the thought of jumping into the marketplace in some kind of business of their own, what would you say to encourage that pastor?
Well, depending on their situation, if they're nervous about it, I would say, let's talk about what's the worst thing that could possibly happen. And let's start there. And it's not that bad. Even if you have to look up and realize you're at the wrong congregation, that's like the worst thing that can happen. And so you have to make some change. And if it's somebody that's like their congregation is, yeah, we're into this, leadership says, yes, you can do this, then I'd say, let's create your vision story. Where do you want to be in 3 years? And let's get that down on paper and let's make it happen.
It's awesome. I love that. Well, hey, Greg, I'm going to invite you to stick around and join us backstage. We're going to talk a little bit and hear from you about how you leave the corporate mentality. And this can apply to a pastor as well, because sometimes we show up with this kind of W-2 employee mentality. And instead, how do we switch gears into this more entrepreneurial way of thinking about ourselves? And so I think even though your space is not so much church work, I think what you're going to share can absolutely speak to pastors. So stick around. We're grateful to have you on the show, man, and we'll be with you backstage in just a moment. Thanks so much. All right, let me All right. Well, we are backstage with Greg Gray. Greg, take it away, man. Talk to pastors about how we can navigate away from that corporate mindset and more to an entrepreneurial shift. What would you say to a pastor about that?
First thing I would do is tell them a very, very quick story of mine. So when I was in the corporate world, I knew I had to make a mindset shift, because when you get focused on your W-2 role, whether it's a minister or you're, in my case, it was, a vice president of sales, or no matter what you're doing, it's easy to get caught in the day to day. And I got to get up every day and go do this. And you literally get trapped into what's called an employee mindset. And when you get in an employee mindset, everything you're doing is to please the people that have employed you. Hmm. And while that's okay in its own right, we got to go beyond that. So through introspection and digging deep inside myself and looking on, okay, who do I want to become? I realized one day I went, I've got to flip this script. And so I intentionally said, I'm gonna act like a consultant in my role, and it's going to be not a role that I'm bound to, but it's a role that I'm glad to fulfill for whatever period of time that is. And so if you're a minister and you look at it from that perspective and say, yeah, they've hired me to come in and fulfill this role, but yet I have this other identity, much bigger, right? Like my identity is in Christ first, and then it's identity of my family, and I've got all kinds of other identities. My identity is not this role. And that's what corporate America and ministry America have done to us, is they put this label on us. You're a minister, you're a VP of this, you're whatever. And so that's who we are. And where this really came out was I was executive coaching a guy one time, and he was in the UK. And it made me think back to when I went through that same issue. And I said, so what happens if your role just ended tomorrow? He goes, oh my gosh, I don't know what I would do. My life would basically be over. I was like, no, it wouldn't. You've got think about all this other stuff. But in his mind, he was so tied up into his corporate role, he could not get outside of that. And I believe that's what's happened to so many pastors, is because that becomes our identity. This is Pastor such and such. This is Pastor such and such. You're much bigger than being a pastor. A pastor is just a role.
Yeah.
It's just a role. And so if we flip that script and we stepped outside of it and we look in and go, okay, that's a role I'm serving today, it opens up other possibilities to being an entrepreneur, to being a better husband, better dad, whatever it is. Because you go, okay, I have all these other roles that are really, and at the end of the day, may be more important. Because I can be a great pastor, but if I'm not a good dad, then how can I even be a good pastor, really? Right. And so if we flip that script and we can work on our mindset, I think it opens up other possibilities, other opportunities, other corridors to go down and say, okay, I can do other things in this world. And when that happens and it's opened, you'll never go back the other way. I promise you that, because I cannot be an employee anymore. Yep. I can't. Now, I'm not saying you have to leave your employment, but you have to be able to add things to it.
Yeah. Well, man, you tapped into something that is so real in ministry. I would contend that ministry, there's this narrative and heaviness around this calling. And, where we as pastors start to say things and then believe things like, man, we're working, our calling is the highest in this world. I mean, it's eternal. The work we're doing is eternal. And so ministry has this way of becoming this all-consuming identity for pastors, where early on it's fun. Like we get to do this stuff full time. Like we get to work in the church and we get to see life change up close and personal. But what I see happen over time in ministry is that pastors, it becomes this all demanding, enslaving type thing, where now, I mean, an average pastor doesn't have many friends anymore outside of ministry. They don't have much fun or hobbies. And what at the beginning just was this amazing thing that I get to serve God with my life has now become this all-consuming identity, to where you said, Greg, if that were to go away, if they were to lose that, they don't know who they are outside of being a pastor, because so much of their identity has been consumed by that. So that's a huge thing. And then also what's going through my mind, Greg, is this idea of viewing your church, even though nothing has changed in terms of your employment status and you still are going to get your W-2 and all of that. But instead of considering my church my employer, I'm considering them my client. Like they are just one of my clients, right? I mean, that's really how an entrepreneur thinks, is they're one of my clients, but they're not my only client. I have other open slots in my life where I can serve other people in various capacities. Is that kind of what you're talking about there?
Exactly what I'm talking about. They're just another piece of your life. They're not your life. They're a piece of your life. You know, I mean, so if you stepped out of ministry tomorrow, or that was taken away from you tomorrow, it changes nothing about your relationship with Jesus. It changes nothing about the relationship with your family. It changes nothing about all the other stuff you have. It shouldn't. Yeah. If it does, then you've got way too much wrapped up in it.
Oh, that's so
way
good,
too much.
Man. That's worth the price of admission right there, Greg. That is so good. So anything else you would add to that idea of flipping the script from being a employee to an entrepreneur?
Yeah, there's one other thing, and this is one of my favorite things that I talk about, because when you do that, you're now becoming a leader, and the very first person you have to lead is yourself. And so you need to do some introspective work. And I know that's hard to say to a minister, because most people think ministers and pastors have it all figured out. And let's just let everybody know, well, that ain't true, right? That, you know, that's just not the fact. We're all human. None of us are better than anybody else. We're all human. So what you got to do is you've got to get with some people that you can trust, whether it's a coach or a mastermind group or some really strong friends. You've got to get around some people that are, and I would suggest they shouldn't be ministers. You need to get some cross-functional people from other places that can challenge you and help you in this new endeavor, because we need to discover our blind spots. And by definition, you can't see your blind spot. You'll never find your blind spot. Somebody else has to point that out to you. And so as you're going through this journey, find somebody that can help you find your blind spots, uncover them, and work on them, because we all have them. Yeah. I mean, I'm a coach, and I have 3 coaches right now as we speak. Yep. Because I can't, by definition, see my own blind spots.
Right.
So go attack those blind spots by being around credible, good people that you trust that can help you.
And Greg, I know this, since you've got 3 coaches, you're willing to invest in that, right? You're willing to pay for that, for someone to provide that high level service in your life, correct?
Yeah, I'm paying right now about 6% of my annual revenue income into my coaching business to have coaches. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's so good. And what I find is interesting, sometimes people that like the idea of being paid to be a coach don't see the value in paying someone else to be their coach. And it's one of the biggest oxymorons I see is, you know, a coach, someone who wants to be a coach who doesn't believe in the value of coaching enough to invest in it for themselves. So I agree 100%. That is so worth the investment to have one or more coaches speaking into your life, so that you're now in a position to speak into the lives of others as well.
Absolutely. It's one of the most powerful things you can do in life. Particularly when you get outside of what your industry or wherever you normally spend most of your time, you need to get outside of that and cross cut in different directions. And I mean, still hang out with believers, of course, but get some people that can speak to you from a different perspective.
Yeah. Well, Greg, this has been super helpful, man. I'm grateful for your time and willingness to come on the show and invest into our audience. And just wish you all the best as you continue to serve people in your role and in your capacity there. And just thank you, man. I'm grateful for you.
Yeah, it's been my absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, hey, thanks for watching this episode of the EntrePastors podcast. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can be notified every time we release a new episode. If you'd like to get connected to other pastors who are learning to think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs, then we invite you to check us out on Facebook. Just search for the EntrePastors Connect group, answer a few of our simple questions there, and we'd love to include you in the conversations. And if you're really ready to go to the next level, then we invite you to join our EntrePastors membership community. When you become a monthly subscriber, you will receive access to courses, exclusive community, and coaching that will help you along in your own EntrePastors journey. If there's anything else we can do to serve you, please visit us at EntrePastors.com, and we will do our best to serve you there. God bless everybody. See you soon.